There is a copy of the Bible that never lost the books the rest of the world threw away. It sits in stone churches in the highlands of Ethiopia, guarded by a tradition that broke from Rome before Rome had finished deciding what Scripture even was. That Bible holds 81 books. The one on most shelves holds 66. And inside those extra 15, written in a language most pastors have never read, is a description of what happens at the gate of heaven that no Sunday sermon will ever give you. 3 things are checked at that gate. 3 specific things, named in order. And the church that most of the world inherited teaches none of them, not one. And before we go further, I need to pause for a second, because what I'm about to tell you gets significantly darker, and I realized a while ago that some of this cannot be fully explained in a video format. The complete reconstruction of the 3-part examination at the gate that the Ethiopian scriptures preserve and Rome left out the full weighing scene the way the older books lay it out, the exact function of the heavenly tablets described in the Book of Jubilees, the canon list that names every book set aside at Laodicea, in order I put it all into a written document. It's linked below, and the QR code is on your screen. Now let's continue. Start with what the Ethiopian church actually kept. When the councils of the 4th century sat down to settle which writings belonged inside the Christian scriptures, the Synod of Laodicea in 364 produced a list, and that list drew a boundary. On one side stood the books that would become the standard Bible of Rome and later of the Protestant world. On the other side stood a set of older Jewish and early Christian writings that were pushed out of the canon and, over the centuries that followed, largely forgotten in the West. The Book of Enoch was among them. The Book of Jubilees was among them. So were several others that survive today in complete form only because one church, in one region, refused to let them go. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church operated far from the reach of those councils. It kept a wider canon, and it kept that canon in Ge'ez, an ancient liturgical language most of the scholars who later shaped Western Christianity could not read. For more than 1,000 years, the fuller collection sat inside those stone churches while the rest of Christendom worked from the shorter one. When European scholars finally began translating the Ethiopic manuscripts in the 18th and 19th centuries, they found material that had been circulating in the ancient world at the same time as the Gospels and the letters of Paul. This was not fringe material or obscure heresy. These were texts that the writers of the New Testament themselves quoted. It helps to see the scale of what the wider canon actually holds. Alongside Enoch and Jubilees, the Ethiopian scriptures carry books the rest of Christianity has never bound between the same covers, works with names like the 3 books of Maccabean and the collection known as the broader canon, texts of law and vision and history that were read as scripture in the highlands while they were unknown or dismissed everywhere else. This is not a handful of stray pages. It is a parallel library, preserved and copied by hand across centuries, in a language that sealed it off from the scholars who might have argued it away. When the outside world finally looked inside, it was not looking at forgeries invented in the Middle Ages. It was looking at some of the oldest religious writing that survives anywhere, kept alive by the one tradition that never agreed to give it up. That last point is the one that unsettles people. The Book of Enoch is not merely old, it is cited directly in the New Testament. The letter of Jude, which sits in the standard Bible that every mainstream church accepts, quotes Enoch by name and treats his words as real prophecy. A book the councils removed is quoted as scripture inside a book they chose to keep. Whatever Enoch describes, the earliest Christians were reading it, and at least one of them built an argument on it. So what does the older layer of scripture actually describe about the moment of judgment? Not a single verdict handed down in an instant. Not a simple sorting of believers from unbelievers. The removed texts describe a process, a sequence, something closer to a checkpoint than a courtroom. And when you lay the Ethiopian books beside the Egyptian funerary texts and the Babylonian tablets that came before them, the same 3-part shape appears again and again. A record is consulted, a weight is measured, and a name is confirmed. 3 things, in that order, at the threshold. The mainstream church compressed all of it into one word, faith, and let the rest fall away. The first thing checked is the record. And to understand what the record is, you have to meet the strangest figure in the older scriptures, Enoch himself. In the standard Bible, he gets 4 verses. He walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. That is nearly the entire mention. He lived, he was righteous, he vanished. The text gives you almost nothing. But in the books the councils removed, Enoch is not a footnote. He is the scribe of heaven. The removed texts describe Enoch being taken up while still alive and shown the machinery behind the world. He sees the storehouses of the winds and the paths of the stars and the places prepared for the dead. And he is handed a job. He is made the recorder. In the tradition preserved by the Ethiopian church, Enoch writes down the deeds of humanity, and those writings are kept above on what the texts call the heavenly tablets. Everything a person does is entered there. Nothing is left out. The account is not a summary written after you die. It is a running record kept while you live. The Book of Jubilees, another of the books Rome set aside and Ethiopia kept, makes the tablets even more concrete. Jubilees describes the heavenly tablets as a fixed record of what has been and what will be. The deeds of the righteous are written there. The crimes of the wicked are set down beside them. And the very calendar of history is marked out on the same surface. Jubilees treats the tablets not as poetry but as an actual object, a thing that exists, a document that can be read by those permitted to read it. Enoch is one of the few granted that permission, and what he reports is chilling in its plainness. The account is already being kept. It was being kept before you were ever told about it. And the record in these books is not limited to actions. Enoch is shown that words are entered too, and even the intentions behind them. The tradition treats speech as a thing with weight, something spoken into the air that does not simply vanish but is caught and kept. A curse, a false oath, a promise broken in private, all of it registered. This is why the tradition remembers Enoch not only as a scribe but as a witness. He does not merely file the account, he testifies to it. The book opened at the gate, in this older understanding, was written by someone who watched, and the unsettling implication is that the watching never stopped, that from the first breath to the last there was a hand recording, and the record it produced is complete. Now trace that idea backward, because it did not begin with Enoch. Go to Egypt, and you find the god Thoth standing beside the scales in the Hall of Judgment, holding a scribe's pallet, recording the outcome. Go further back, into Mesopotamia, to the oldest layer of written religion on earth, and you find something the Babylonians called the Tablet of Destinies. It was not a metaphor to them. It was described as a physical tablet that held the fates and functions of the cosmos, and whoever possessed it held authority over the order of the world. In the Babylonian myths, wars are fought over that tablet. The storm creature Anzu steals it and throws the heavens into chaos. The detail that matters is the shape of the belief. Long before Enoch, the civilizations of the ancient Near East already held that destiny was written down and stored, that a record existed, and that the record governed what became of you. By the time this idea reaches the Standard Bible, it survives, but barely, and stripped of its detail. The book of Revelation describes the final judgment in a single, compressed image. The books were opened, and another book was opened, which is the book of life, and the dead were judged out of the things written in the books, according to their works. That verse is the fossil of a much larger structure. Books, in the plural, are opened. The dead are judged by what is written in them. This is the same record the older texts describe at length, reduced to one sentence at the very end of the canon. The machinery of the tablets, the scribe who keeps them, the running account, all of it folded down into a phrase most readers skim past. And here is what the mainstream church does with even that phrase. It teaches that the record exists in order to be erased. The blood covers it. The account is wiped. For the believer, the books are effectively blank. That is a real and central teaching, and no one is mocking it here. But notice what it does to the older picture. In the removed books, the record is not something to be erased. It is something to be read at the gate, line by line, deed by deed, and answered for. The first thing checked is not whether your record was deleted. It is what your record actually says. Before we move on to the second thing they check, stop for a second. What you just heard about the record, the book that already holds your deeds, is the part that changes everything. But it only makes sense when you see it written out next to the older account in Enoch and Jubilees. The heavenly tablets, the book of names. It's all in the document linked below. Take 5 seconds right now, grab it, and then come back. Because what comes next builds directly on it. The link is in the description. QR code is on your screen. The second thing checked is the weight, and this is where the trail runs straight through Egypt, because the clearest surviving description of the weighing does not come from Jerusalem at all. It comes from the Egyptian funerary texts, the collection most people know as the Book of the Dead, though its own name translates closer to the Book of Coming Forth by Day. Those texts are older than the Hebrew Bible, and they describe the judgment of the soul with a precision no later scripture matches. In the Egyptian scene, the dead person is led into a great hall. At the center stands a balance, a set of scales. On one side of the balance is placed the heart of the deceased. On the other side is placed a single feather, the feather of Ma'at, the principle of truth and cosmic order. The heart is weighed against the feather, not against gold, not against a mountain of good works, but against truth itself, rendered as something almost weightless. Anubis steadies the balance. Thoth, the scribe, records the result. And crouched beside the scale waits a creature the Egyptians called Ammit, the devourer, part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus, ready to consume the heart that fails. Before the weighing, the dead person had to speak. The Egyptian texts preserve what scholars call the negative confession, a long recitation in which the soul declares, statement after statement, everything it did not do, that it has not stolen, has not killed, has not lied, has not brought suffering to another. 42 denials, addressed to 42 judges, each aimed at a specific wrong. The heart was then weighed to test whether the confession was true. If the heart came up heavy with the very things the mouth had denied, the scale tipped, and Ammit was waiting. The weighing was a lie detector built into the architecture of the afterlife. There is one more detail in the Egyptian material that turns the weighing from a metaphor into something almost procedural. The Egyptians did not locate thought and character in the head. They located both in the heart. The heart was the seat of memory, intention, and will, the organ that knew what a person had truly done, which is why at the weighing it is the heart that is placed on the scale and nothing else. And here is the unsettling part. The Egyptians were so convinced the heart would testify honestly, even against its own owner, that they buried a carved stone with the body, a heart scarab, inscribed with a plea that the heart not betray the deceased before the judges. Consider what that means. They built the entire ritual around a fear that your own heart, once weighed, would tell the truth you had spent a lifetime hiding. The confession was spoken by the mouth, the verdict was delivered by the heart, and the two did not always agree. Now the obvious objection, and it deserves to be stated honestly, a serious historian will tell you these are separate religions with separate gods, and that similar images appearing in different cultures do not prove a shared source. Humans everywhere fear judgment, and a balance is an obvious way to picture fairness. That is a fair argument, and for any single parallel it holds. But the weighing does not stay in Egypt. It reappears in the Hebrew scriptures in language too close to ignore. The book of Proverbs states plainly that the Lord weighs the heart. The book of Daniel hands a king his sentence in words written on a wall, and the meaning of one of them is simple. You have been weighed in the balance and found wanting. The image of the scale, the heart set upon it, the verdict of too light, travels out of Egypt and into the Bible itself. And the scale did not stay outside Christianity either. Walk into an old European church, look at the medieval carvings of the Last Judgment, and you will often find the archangel Michael standing with a balance in his hands, weighing the souls of the dead while a demon tries to drag one side of the scale down. Art historians even have a name for the scene. They call it the psychostasia, the weighing of the soul. It appears again and again across Christian Europe for 1,000 years, in stone and paint and stained glass, the same balance the Egyptians carved into their tombs, now held by an archangel. The image the church stopped preaching in words, it never stopped painting on its walls. The people who could not read still saw the scale every time they walked toward the altar. Somewhere between the wall and the pulpit the teaching went quiet, but the picture never did. What the Ethiopian layer preserves, and what the mainstream teaching drops, is that the weighing is a second and separate step. The record tells what you did. The weighing tests what you are. A person can carry a long record and a light heart, or a short record and a heavy one. The older texts keep these as two distinct checks at the gate, and they insist the second cannot be faked, because it is not your words being measured, it is the thing underneath your words. The modern sermon rarely mentions a scale at all. It speaks of belief, and it stops there. But the scriptures that stone churches in Ethiopia carried through 15 centuries still describe a balance, and they still describe something waiting beside it for the heart that comes up short. The third thing checked is the name. And of the three, this is the one the church came closest to keeping, though it kept it in a form so simplified that its original weight is nearly invisible. The Standard Bible speaks of the book of life. To have your name written in it is to be saved. To have it blotted out is to be lost. Revelation warns that anyone whose name is not found written in the book of life is cast away at the end, so the name survives in the canon. But in the older texts, and in the traditions that fed them, the name at the gate is not a single line in a single ledger. It is a test of its own. In the ancient understanding, a name was never just a label. It was a possession, a key, a thing that carried power. To know the true name of a being was to hold authority over it. The Egyptian texts are saturated with this. The dead soul, moving through the gates of the underworld, is stopped at each threshold by a guardian, and at each gate the soul must speak. It must name the gate, name the guardian, and prove it knows the words that open the way. A soul that does not know the name does not pass. The journey through the afterlife, in the oldest surviving version, is in large part an examination of what you know, spoken aloud, at a sequence of gates. That same shape survived quietly inside the Christian East long after the West let it fade. In the older Orthodox tradition, there is a teaching about the ascent of the soul after death, a passage through a series of stations where the soul is stopped and examined, station by station, and must give an account before it is allowed to rise to the next. The name, the account, the spoken answer at the threshold, none of it vanished. It migrated to the edges of Christianity, and survived there, in the same regions and the same centuries where the fuller scriptures survived, while the center of the Western Church quietly replaced the whole sequence with a single phrase about belief. The Eastern account is more specific than most Western Christians realize. In the fuller version of the teaching, the stations the soul must pass are not left vague, they are counted, and each one examines a particular category of failing. One station tests the sins of the tongue, the idle and cruel words a person let loose. The next tests deception. Another tests anger, another pride, another the appetites of the body. Each threshold a separate audit of a separate part of the life just ended. The soul is stopped, questioned, and shown the record for that one category, and only if it can answer is it permitted to continue upward. Set that beside the Egyptian gates, where the soul is stopped and must name what stands before it, and beside the 42 Egyptian judges, each assigned to a specific wrong. The structure is the same. A series of thresholds, a specific test at each one, an account demanded before you are allowed to pass. What the West compressed into a single instant, the older traditions stretched into a gauntlet. The Babylonians understood the third check too, in their own idiom. Their great creation epic, the Enuma Elish, does not end with the making of the world. It ends with a naming. The gods recite the names of Marduk, 50 of them, one after another, and in that culture, reciting the full name was itself an act of power, a way of fixing destiny and authority in place. To name correctly was to command. To be named was to be assigned your place in the order of things. Carry that forward and the book of life stops looking like a simple guest list. A name written in heaven, in the older world, was a destiny fixed, a place assigned, a claim that could be spoken at the threshold and could not be forged. And a name blotted out was not a clerical deletion. It was the erasing of a person from the order of creation itself. Put the three together and the pattern is hard to unsee. First the record, kept by the scribe of heaven, written on tablets, opened at the end. Then the weight, measured on a balance, the heart set against truth, tested for what the record alone cannot show. Last the name, spoken at the gate, proving you belong, and proving you know the way through. A document, a scale, and a word. 3 checks, in sequence, at the threshold, described across Babylon and Egypt and the removed books of the Hebrew tradition, and carried into the present by the one church that never trimmed its Bible down to match everyone else's. Let me be clear about what this is and what it is not. No one is claiming that a lost verse was found listing these 3 checks in a numbered row with a heading over it. That is not how the older scriptures work, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest. What is being claimed is narrower, and, if you sit with it, stranger. When you read the books the councils removed, then read the Egyptian texts that predate them, then read the Babylonian material older still, the same 3-part examination keeps assembling itself out of the pieces. A record consulted, a weight measured, a name confirmed. The mainstream church did not argue against these 3 things. It simply stopped teaching them, folded them into one moment of faith, and left the detailed version inside books its own followers were told not to read. It is worth being fair to the councils as well, because the standard historical explanation is not sinister. Scholars will point out that Enoch was excluded partly because its authorship was doubted, because a book claiming to be written by a man 7 generations after Adam invited obvious suspicion, and because its visions of angels and giants and cosmic geography did not fit the tighter theology the church was trying to settle. Jubilees raised the same kind of problem. By that account, nothing was hidden at all. The books were simply judged and found wanting, the way any editor trims a manuscript. That is a reasonable position, and it may even be the correct one, but it does not answer the quieter question underneath everything else. If the books were merely doubtful, why did an apostle quote one of them as prophecy, and why did an entire ancient church stake its scripture on keeping them? Doubt cuts both ways, and it cuts on both sides. The West doubted the books, and the East doubted the trimming. The question the Ethiopian Bible forces is not whether the shorter canon is wrong, it is why the longer one was allowed to fall silent. The books were not disproven, they were set aside. Enoch was quoted by an apostle, and then struck by a council. Jubilees was read for centuries and then forgotten everywhere except one country. The weighing of the heart was carved on tomb walls for 3,000 years and then reduced to a single warning on a wall in the book of Daniel that few readers stopped to examine. None of this was lost by accident. Every piece of it was a decision, made by people whose names and reasons are, in many cases, still on the record. And that is the part worth sitting with. The 3 things did not disappear because they were false. They disappeared because a smaller story was easier to carry, easier to preach, easier to standardize across an empire. The fuller account survived in the one place that stayed outside the standardizing. It survived in Ge'ez, in stone churches, in a Bible with 81 books that most of the Christian world has never opened. The record, the weight, and the name are still described there, in order, exactly as the older world understood them. If you want the 3 checks laid side by side, the Ge'ez passages, next to the Egyptian scenes, next to the Babylonian tablets, together with the council records that quietly set them aside, it is all in the written document linked below. The shorter Bible handed you a single word and told you it was enough. What kept its book still names all 3 things waiting at the gate. The church you know teaches none of them, while the Bible that never trimmed itself still names everyone. Sit with the arithmetic of it. 66 books against 81, 1 word against 3 things, a single instant against a gate crossed in stages. The distance between those 2 Bibles is not a matter of style. It is a matter of what you were told to expect beyond your own death. One version says the record is blank, the scale is gone, and the name is already secured. The other describes a threshold where a book is opened, a heart is weighed, and a name is spoken aloud, exactly as Babylon and Egypt and the oldest Hebrew writings described it long before any council decided what you could read.